static while I build a blueprint from the logic of the frantic. My spirit is a mortar, my resolve is every brick. The pace is high energy, the air is getting thick. I don't look for luck, I just look for the open seams. A midnight marathon, chasing high voltage dreams. From the basement to the roof, the view is getting clear. I'm harvesting the lessons that were planted by the fear. Internal fire climbing higher through the smoke. The city tries to bind us, but the spirit never broke. Keep your eyes on the horizon, keep the engine in the grid. We rise above the concrete, yeah, we never gotta quit. We rise above the concrete, yeah, we never gotta quit. The pressure is a polish, it's a grind that never ends.
All right, good day, everyone. I wanted to bring this to your attention because this month the White House put out a document with the title, "I'm Not Making This Up," and this is President Trump is right about the Smithsonian alongside the Administrative Domestic Policy Council that produced a report called Saving America's Story. Now, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this particular executive order. Like I stated, for quite some time, President Trump, he was signing hundreds of executive orders, and a lot of these were going over our head. But silently, while we are handling our own business, we are calling out people who are tailcoating on the way of our lineage, people who have been denigrating Black Americans for quite some time. All the while, this administration, right? And I look at both administrations the same, whether it be Democratic or Republican. But this administration, it states here, and I want you to see the title of this executive order, "Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History." It seems like President Trump probably named that himself. Now, it goes on to state, replacing objective facts with a distorted narrative driven by ideology rather than the truth. Basically, it's stating that this sort of destructive ideology that coincides with race of all particular people, especially Black people here in America, is false. It's a false narrative. It's some sort of outlandish ideology. It goes on to state that under this historical revision, our nation's unparalleled legacy of advancing liberty, individual rights, and human happiness is reconstructed as inherently racist, sexist, and oppressive, or otherwise irredeemably flawed. Well, America was built on racism. America was built on white supremacy. America was built on one demographic of people initially, the very foundation of it. Rather than fostering unity and a deeper understanding of our shape and shared past, the widespread effort to rewrite history deepens society divides and fosters a sense of national shame, discarding the progress America has made in the ideals that continue to inspire millions around the globe. You know, one thing I've never heard from any president, whether it be Obama or Trump or Bill Clinton, just tell people stop being racist. I know it's outlandish to say, but have you ever heard an American president like J.D. Vance came out and said, you don't have to apologize for being white anymore? But I've never heard an American president state that, you know, we live somewhat in a racist country and we do things behind closed doors and we say things behind closed doors that are racially insightful and that it calls to be influenced by people in active aggression and violence against, you know, predominantly one demographic of people, Black Americans. Do violence because of race and ethnic occur to Asians and Hispanics? Of course it does. Does it happen to Jews? Of course it does. Does it happen at the same rate and same percentage as Black Americans? Absolutely not. We can look at the crime statistics of the FBI and call out the facts there. Now, what we're witnessing here, and you guys probably heard some rumors, some news about this, how they're literally eradicating Black history from the Smithsonian, let alone this country altogether, because they say it's divisive. They're literally listing dozens of complaints about the Smithsonian. And a lot of those complaints target the National Museum of African American History and Culture, as well as the National Museum of American History. The core grievance that the way these museums tell the story of slavery and racial injustice encourages, in their own words, suspicion, resentment, and division. This all flows from an executive order called Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History, which specifically named the African American History Museum. And federal agencies were giving a deadline. When are we going to come to the realization? And when I say we, I don't mean you and I, but I mean those in power or deemed to be empowered, as if they don't already know. They know exactly what they're doing. They're erasing history so they don't have to do anything legislatively. They don't have to create any policies. And potentially they could eradicate Black Americans from the face of this. And this is not fearmonger anyone, because we're not going to go down like that. But again, you are erasing the achievements, you're erasing the struggles, you're erasing the things that we've done. So there's no contribution of Black Americans in this country. What have you guys done? I want you guys to not think about tomorrow. I don't want you to think about 5 years from now. I want you to think about 10, 20, 30 years from now. When your children have children, is Black history going to be a thing? Or are we going to teach our own? Because I'll get right to the bluff, the bottom line up front. Regardless of what these governments do, whether it be federal, state, or local, we have to teach our own people our history in this country, or it will be forever forgotten. But I want to make sure that this gets out, because I wonder, where are the Obamas at? Are you going to take some of these statues and artifacts, some of these plaques, all of these artifacts, and put them inside of your museum? Are the Clintons going to do it? Are any of the past presidents or prominent people going to put this in their museums and their organizations? Are they going to hold these relics so people can see what has occurred? This sort of Gestapo, 451 Fahrenheit, the erasure of a people's history and their contributions to the country? Because, yeah, there is one history, American history. But within American history, there's different divergence. There's a hierarchy of different, because all the different types of people we have in America. There's Irish history. There's Italian history. There's the different ethnic groups of Asian history. There's Black American history. There's white Anglo-Saxon history. There's Native American history that encompasses to make American history. But why are you focusing and eradicating one history? You're not going after Native American history, because then you would dismantle the Indian Bureau of Affairs, right? We didn't create the Freedmen's Bureau of Affairs. We had support and resources given to us by the federal government, but that was dismantled. But they never got rid of the Indian Bureau of Affairs. They still funnel billions of dollars to them. There's organizations that support Jewish Americans here in this country. They haven't dismantled that. They have organizations that they fund and support for Hispanics. They haven't dismantled that. But every time they come to Black Americans, they figure out a way to eradicate, delete, and remove anything that we have achieved and are achieving in this country. And see, today has marked the deadline of all of these federal agencies. They were giving a deadline, and today was it, to identify and remove and flag exhibits and materials that put too much emphasis on slavery and racial injustice. Isn't that very subjective of someone's own account and emotions and what they deem is too slavery-like? What is that? What is that? It states here from the AmericanProgress.org that the Trump administration is intentionally erasing the Black history told by public lands and waters. They're going in every facet of America, every department, every agency, and not slowly, but systematically removing anything dealing with Black history. We have to be precise about what's happening right now, because the framing actually matters. Because don't you know there's demographics of people? There's white people, there's Asian people, there are Hispanic people, probably even some Native American people that have no idea what Black Americans have contributed to America. They don't know the achievements that we've made in the medical field, the inventions, the procedures that Vivian Thomas created, the procedure to basically solved the blue baby syndrome that was most currently in white babies, by the way. Or the movie that people, it's kind of old right now, but I think Cuba Gooding Jr. starred in it, called Gift in Hands. Ben Carson came up with the procedure because I think he was a neuro, and don't quote me on this, but he was a neuro medical surgeon that separated Siamese twins that took a very long time. There are so many achievements. Or quite recently, Moses West. He's the inventor of the atmospheric water generation. Patricia Bath created the laser FICO machine. So we don't just have achievements in food and in farming, but we have it in technology, in IT. What about Emmett McHenry, the father of the .com? There's all these different achievements that Black Americans in this country, even through Jim Crow, even through turmoil and the destructive behavior of the system of white supremacy and those who contribute to it. Whether they wear a suit and tie or cut off sleeves. They're not saying add more context. They're not saying tell a fuller story about slavery and racism in this country. No, they're not doing that. They're saying certain history makes people very uncomfortable. That's what they're stating here. That's exactly what they're stating here. And today is a deadline. They're saying that certain history makes people very uncomfortable and it should come down. Oh, it's making me uncomfortable. Our ancestors and forefathers did all these horrible, heinous acts to Black people. They buck break them when they didn't fall in line and listen to us when we had them on plantations. They stretched the biggest, the blackest, strongest slave across a tree stump. And we had someone to literally all-word him repeatedly to scare and fearmonger all the other slaves to fall in line and do what we did. We put their children in slavery. We fed them to alligators. We hung, we dismembered them. We cut off their private parts. We had their children to have relations with their mother to make more big, strong slaves. We put them in servitude for over 250 years. Then after that, even when we released them from slavery, we still treated them horribly bad and still murdered, death, killed them through Jim Crow. And even to this day, we don't want to feel guilty about that anymore. So let's just erase the history. Are we going to erase the history of the Civil War? Oh, no. That's American history. We fought back. And I want you guys to notice which history they are attacking. It's the slavery exhibits. It's the racial injustice exhibits. It's reportedly that the Woolworth lunch counter sit-in, one with particular groups' pain and one particular group's triumph, is the thing that keeps getting flagged as divisive. A sit-in. We are not allowed in stores, in shops, in restaurants that we are citizens of this country in. That we built the very foundation of this country. See, when you say that Black Americans built the very foundation of this country, people automatically go to these emotional responses like, you guys didn't build the country, the immigrants did. When you are first building something, there's a foundation. I want you guys to look at housing development projects that you've driven past. One of the first steps they do, they survey the land. Then they excavate the land. And they do removal of the topsoil, right? And they do the bottom endings of the foundation of the framing. And then they pour the concrete. And then they start to build on top of that. See, when all these other immigrants came to America for these quote unquote opportunities, the very infrastructure of America was already built. Some of the first railroads was not built by the Chinese. They were built by foundational Black Americans. The first houses, the first roads, the first sewers, all of these things were built initially by foundational Black Americans. Did others come and contribute to the building of America and evolving America and moving into the industrial age? Of course they did. I'm not erasing no one's history, but I'm not going to forbid my history. But these things in America keep getting flagged as divisive. How's history divisive? Oh, because you got exhibits and everything. I don't see anyone attacking the Jewish Holocaust Museum in DC, and they have other Holocaust museums around America. I don't see anyone attacking those things. I don't anyone, and guess what? The Holocaust didn't even happen in America. Maybe that's why they're keeping it up. They're talking about it's a choice about whose story gets to stay on the wall. Because here's the thing, the sit-ins isn't a story of division, it's a story of Americans, black and white, who looked at the injustice and had the courage to end it. If that makes somebody uncomfortable, the problem isn't the exhibit. The problem is that the truth still stings. You know why? Because racism, bigotry, and discrimination is ever so prevalent in America today. And notice the sleight of hand in the word divisive. Telling the truth about slavery didn't divide this country. Slavery divided this country. Again, telling the truth about slavery didn't divide this country. Slavery divided this country. The exhibit isn't the wound. It's the record of the wound and the record of how we started to heal it. Calling the record divisive is like blaming the x-ray for the broken bone. Well, you know, once we x-rayed you, we realized that you have broken bones, and it's not you, it's this x-ray, because if we didn't x-ray it, you probably wouldn't have broken bones. How idiotic is that? When somebody tells you the honest history is what's tearing us apart, check who benefits from you knowing it. I keep telling people these things are happening right in front of our face. And for some strange reason, we are so focused on all these other things that in some regard doesn't help the advancements of our people. I won't name those things because then people will start to link them to other influence. And I'm not here to start any divisive against my own people. But there are some things we really need to focus on. Because here's a question. Why does a museum exhibit matter when people are worried about groceries and rent? That may hit home for most people because control of history is the control of the future. There's an old line. Whoever controls the past controls the present. You guys heard that before, correct? A nation's museums are where it decides. Officially, what it's willing to remember and what it wants to forget. When you quietly pull the slavery exhibits and soften the injustice, that's what essentially happened. You're not just editing a display, you're raising a generation of kids who walk through the official American story and actually never see it. We are replacing words in textbooks that state that, oh, there was no slave, they were laborers. They didn't came over here on slave ships, they came over here on indentured servant ships. And a people who don't know how they got here can't defend the ground that they're standing on. This is why every authoritarian movement in this history has gone after the historians, the books, and the museums. If anyone hasn't seen the movie 451 Fahrenheit or read the book there is, you should. Because you'll understand exactly what I'm referring to. Not because a plaque is dangerous. When you go to these museums, they have pictures and plaques and scrolls and textbooks and artifacts and statues. They're not dangerous, but the memory is. And think about who has the memory and the memory who hits it the hardest. It's the young black kid on a school trip who wasn't supposed to stand in front of that lunch counter and realized for the first time that people who look like him changed this country with nothing but their courage and their bodies. And if you take that moment away and you haven't made him a prouder American, you made him a smaller American. You told him without saying it that his people's chapter is the one that's optional. Yeah. Black history is optional. And not to go off on black immigrants by any chance, but I think he was Nigerian, but he was running, I don't recall his name, but he was running for the governorship in Minnesota, and I believe he was Nigerian. You guys can quote me if you understand who I'm talking about, but he was talking about removing Black history, eradicating Black history, not celebrating Black history. And that's just one very few examples, but I'm talking about a lot of things people equate to skin color, where we're not equating things to lineage. That's the real cause, erasure. It's not measured in square feet or exhibit space. It's measured in what a generation grows, what a generation grows up believing it's capable of. We need to understand the struggles. We need to understand the strides. We need to understand the thrive that we made. Have you noticed they always preach and teach about Martin Luther King Jr., but not really Malcolm X? You just hear about him because he was so prevalent. Do you teach your kids about Malcolm X? Or do you just let the school system teach them about MLK? And I want you guys to understand this. This isn't a one-off. It fits a pattern we've watched build for over a year. Because earlier this year, the National Park Service altered a page about the Underground Railroad that featured Harriet Tubman and only restored it after public backlash. There has been a broader push tied to the same truth and sanity order to scrub slavery and racial injustice framing from federal sites and material. So the Smithsonian move isn't the beginning. This is the escalation. They started at the edges. A park web page here, a plaque there, and now they're walking into the flagship, the Smithsonian, the crown jewel of all things, the museum that millions of Black families had traveled across the country to stand inside and feel seen. Because when schools and people from foreign countries visit DC, they go directly to what they call the mall, which is in downtown DC between the Reflecting Pool, the Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, the Capitol, and they visit the multitude of different museums in DC. And they always come across the African American Museum and Culture. And they realize what this country has done to one demographic of people. They're like, really, this happened? I just thought that Black people were hoodlums and gangsters and all these other degenerate things. I didn't know they were like this prior to or during slavery and Jim Crow. That they had all these systematic barriers put against them. So it's something that the Trump administration said that I want you guys to understand something really quickly. Now, let me show you this very quick. Let me blow this up. I want to show you guys this. And I do apologize for the small text for you guys on your cell phones. It states here that the federal government under the administration's Restoring Truth and Sanity to America History executive order has targeted exhibits and programs at the National Museum of African American History and Culture that is categorized as promoting improper, divisive, or anti-American ideology related to race and American history. It goes on to state that inherently oppressive or to divide visitors based on race. The artifacts and exhibits like the Woolworth's lunch counter display have faced rotation, dismantling, or returns to lenders. Now I want to go to what this actually states here, that this is a distorted narrative driven by ideology rather than the truth. So in America, being a very capitalist society, very political society that we are, if this is distorted narrative driven by ideology than truth, then we won't have policies and laws and legislation that was passed that will divide, that will limit, that will punish and brutalize one demographic of people. We just wouldn't have that, would we not? There's no racial laws in America. What are Black people talking about? They're just making these things up. Oh, okay. U.S. federal and state laws divided people by race primarily through colonial and antebellum slave codes, post-Civil War Black codes, and 20th century Jim Crow laws. It goes on to state down here, major categories of racial divisionary laws, slave codes, pre-Civil War state laws such as the Virginia and South Carolina, that define African Americans as chattel property, stripped them of legal rights, and prohibited assembly or literacy. Then you had the Black Codes and the Jim Crow laws. And then you had the anti-Asian alien laws, right? They had all these particular laws to exclude, denigrate, and to punish people based on race. Then we had these monumental Supreme Court cases like the Plessy versus Ferguson, I'm pretty sure you guys heard of this one, that validated state-level racial segregation under the separate but equal doctrine. Brown versus the Board of Education, overturning the separate but equal framework in public education. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, prohibiting discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin in public places. Loving versus Virginia, Supreme Court ruling declaring state bans on interracial marriage unconstitutionally. They said that was unconstitutional, that you can't marry who you want to marry. But they say that none of this was based upon race. But there we have racial laws. And I can go a little bit deeper if we really get into the state laws of certain states. What about the 30-60-30 line of Missouri, where above one line, there was freedom, and below another line, there was slavery. But nothing was predicated upon race. And then people will go back and tell me about a guy named Anthony Johnson, who was an Angolian who came over here to be an indentured servant. And then even before, quote unquote, the institutional legalization of slavery, that he had slaves and that he enslaved them. So you enslaved your own people, and your people Ladies and gentlemen, if a country allows for people to own other people, I have a question. If the majority of those people are one demographic, do we then blame the 1% that the majority of them would then enslave? Because when people talk about slavery, are we just thinking about the free work, the free labor, the building of the most powerful and richest country in the world? Or are we thinking about the things that actually happened in slavery? The R word repeatedly, the torture, the maiming, the dismemberment, I mean, ladies and gentlemen, I can go on and on about this, and I think you guys understand what I'm getting at. But I'm proving a point here is how this country is literally erasing Black history right before our eyes, because today was a deadline. Today was a deadline. So when you connect the dots, this stops looking like a budget quibble and starts looking like a project. Because I really want to paint the full picture here. I really want to paint the full picture here. The administration and its supporters frame this as removing ideology and divisiveness from taxpayer-funded institutions. If that is the case, then why are we celebrating, or why are we representing, or why do we have the Holocaust Museum in DC and amongst other states? Why do we have other museums representing all these other demographics of people? Oh, I'm sorry if Black American history involves slavery. I'm sorry that Black American history involves torturing other people, that it involves triumph of a people, that it involves rebellion and revolting and revolutionary acts of a people. I'm sorry. Should we then apologize for our damn existence? Because they argue that museums should tell an uplifting, unifying national story. Hell to the no, because that is not what America is built on. America is built on war, in battle, in death, in murder, in genocide. That is what America is built on. America is not built on unifying national story. That's not what it's built on. Not dwell on the deepest chapters of America. That's the pitch. And believe me, some Americans generally buy it. Here's what they leave out, right? You cannot tell an honest American story and skip slavery, because slavery is not a footnote to the American story for 250 years. It was a load-bearing wall of the American economy. Because the question is this: how does any country become as rich as, become as powerful, and become as diverse as America, where everybody want to flock to America to achieve the American dream? How did that happen? Well, they came over here in the new America, and people just work hard. Ladies and gentlemen, anytime that you immigrate or migrate, when you immigrate, what did you immigrate to? You didn't immigrate to a barren land. You didn't immigrate to a place where there was nothing there. You immigrate to a place where foundational Black Americans built something, and your people benefited from it. And that's no slay against you guys who may be immigrants watching this. But we do need to understand the history of how this country came to be. And on the other side, civil rights leaders and historians are calling it exactly what it looks like: erasure. Because if you erase it, we have to replace it. See, that line right there is the whole spirit of Black survival in this country, and it always has been, and it always should be. They have tried to erase us from the record before, and every single time we have to write ourselves back in. The disagreement isn't really about whether history is uncomfortable. It's about whether a government gets to decide which truth its citizens are allowed to remember. I'm not somebody who thinks America is only its sins. No. See, this country's story has real triumph in it, and a lot of that triumph is Black. But you don't honor a country by lying to it. The lunch counter, when they did the sit-in, the slave ship manifest of how some of us got over here, not all. The auction block, the picnic table where they picked out, you guys know what I'm referring to. The marches, those aren't to make anybody hate America. That's why this is not what this is about. Oh, you hate your country or you hate America. Won't you go back here and go back there? It's not about that. That can look itself in the mirror and say, we did that. And we chose to become something better. Is America better than it was in the 1800s? Of course it is. Is it better than it was in the early 1900s? Of course it is. But here's the thing. Take that mirror down, you don't get a prouder country. You get a country that forgets how to grow. And here's what I need you to hear. They can pull an exhibit off a wall, but they cannot pull it out of us. We have to stay educated about our own history and teach our children, but not to be stagnated in the pain, in the struggle, but to understand what we went through and how we got here today and how we can strive and thrive from that. The history lives in our families, our churches, our music, our record. So if they take the lunch counter down in DC, my hometown, we put it up in every classroom, every living room, every channel like this one. If you erase it, we will replace it. So today was the deadline of what actually gets removed, because a list is the one thing and an empty display case is another. But we actually, unfortunately, we need to watch the Smithsonian own leadership and whether they can push back or comply quietly. That's why I have this up, ladies and gentlemen. It states here that the Trump administration, right? They talk about the White House, but the Trump administration says the Smithsonian leadership can't be trusted because the historians were fighting back against this tooth and nail. History is history. Why are we trying to remove it? Why are we trying to change it? I thought America was so free. Oh, but no, what's the name of the executive order again? We're trying to restore truth and sanity to American history by eliminating, removing, and deleting Black history, especially Black history dealing with slavery. We really need to start watching Congress, because the Congressional Black Caucus and others have leverage, okay? They have leverage here if they use it. And unfortunately, the Congressional Black Caucus really haven't used any of their leverage because a lot of the Congressional Black Caucus, wait for it, are unfortunately immigrants. Not all, but quite a few of them. Another date to watch is August 28th, because that's the 63rd anniversary of the March on Washington and the March on Washington of this year. Will it be Al Sharpton's Defend the Vote? Okay. And, well, he passed away. I don't want to really put his name out there like that. But I know Reverend Al Sharpton is leading something by the Action Network and the King family about the March on Washington this year. And it's already set for that day. When they come for the history, the answer has always been to march in it. So, in my opinion, here's the big picture, family. This looks like a fight about a museum, but it's the same fight it's always been. It's about power. Who gets to decide what this country remembers? Whose pain counts? Whose carriage gets to stay on the wall? The Democrats have Black Americans focus on immigrants. The Democrats have Black Americans to focus on immigrants. Have you noticed that some foundational Black Americans focus more on immigrants and they well-being more so than their own people? Sometimes I always believe is double negative. But nevertheless, more times than not, I believe that there's always an underlying meaning of the reason why we have some foundational Black Americans to support and trust and hang on the coattails of the Dixiecrats, the Democratic Party, because they believe that they're going to do something yet again in the next 2 or 4 years, and they haven't done anything. Oh, they gave you Obamacare. They gave everybody Obamacare. The Affordable Health Care Act. So telling you that the lunch counter, the exhibits therein, is too divisive. And that lunch counter is proof that ordinary people can change a nation just by refusing to move. And that just one example is not division. That's the most American thing there is. And we really should keep our eyes on today and see what occurs. And if people want to give their support and go out there on August 28th, and we should never let anyone convince us about our history and that is a problem. We should never do that. Let me see some of your comments. We have Volvo, nice to see you. DSB state their need to keep those imposters in place so they can continue to undermine FBAs. Shalom to you as well, B1. But yeah, family, a lot of things are occurring right now, and I see a lot of my brothers and sisters going hard on immigrants, and that's needed. But there's a lot more things behind the veil that are occurring while we focus on delineation. I think we need to widen our scope just a bit to understand why we are delineating and calling out those people that are part of these different ethnic groups, especially Black ethnic groups from the Caribbean, Africa, within a classification of tethers, because not all Black ethnic groups from the Caribbean and Africa are tethers, and tethers know who they are. But we need to widen that scope of what's actually happening to foundational Black Americans in this country, because we can focus on that solely while all these other things are occurring to our people. And we need voices, large voices, small voices, to put out the word so we have the right people in place to fight out against this. Because again, I wonder, those millionaires and billionaires, and I'm not calling on entertainers, but let's take, for instance, the Obamas, right? I used them earlier. They have a whole building that they could take some of these artifacts and clear out a room or add an extension. I don't know. But I'm pretty sure that they have more weight, they have more influence, they have more powerful friends than you and I. And there's something that could be done to reserve this, to preserve this, to stop this. Because this right here is crazy to me, that you would call Black history, because it has to deal with slavery and it makes you feel uncomfortable and you don't want to remember the past, that you would call it replacing objective facts with a distorted narrative driven by ideology rather than the truth. Some people don't even think slavery happened, even though we have people who were the babies of slaves giving them truly accounts, and we have very few of them even left. So nevertheless, family, drop your thoughts and comments below. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and share this with somebody who needs the truth, who needs to hear the truth behind the headlines. You guys have a great day.